On the fateful day of October 28, 312 AD, Constantine stood on the precipice of destiny as he faced the River Tiber, near the Milvian Bridge. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and metal, the weight of impending battles settling over the troops. Across the river raided Maxentius, a rival claimant to the Roman throne, his army poised for the clash that would decide the future of an empire. Hours before, the sky had opened up to Constantine, presenting him with a vision, an inscribed Christian symbol, and the words, "In Hoc Signo Vinces," or, "By this sign you will conquer." The sign was hastily painted on the shields of his soldiers, a divine endorsement that transformed the upcoming conflict into a holy war. Among Constantine's advisors was Lactantius, a Christian educator known for his wisdom. He had long been advocating for tolerance towards the Christians, persecuted minorities seen as threats to traditional Roman beliefs. For Lactantius, the vision affirmed that the tides of destiny were shifting, not only for Constantine, but also for the Christian faith. As the two armies clashed in the carnage of sword and shield, it became evident that this was no mere battle for political power. It was a war for the soul of Rome itself. When Maxentius' forces were driven back and he met his watery death in the Tiber, Constantine's victory was seen as nothing short of miraculous. The Christian symbol on the shields of his soldiers was now a herald of divine favor, and Constantine would carry this conviction through the rest of his reign. In that single, violent day, the destiny of an empire and of religion was changed forever. Was Constantine a true convert, touched by divine insight, or a savvy political strategist seizing the moment to consolidate power? Were the Christians merely pawns in a grander political scheme, or the beneficiaries of a newfound era of religious tolerance? Join us today on Historical Quarrels as we delve into these questions and more. As the philosopher Socrates once said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." Let us then examine the complexities surrounding Constantine, the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and a conversion that would shape the Western world for millennia to come. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Historical Quarrels Podcast, the only podcast that teaches you about fun things like how to rout a phalanx, how to stage a coup and kill your greedy siblings who try to take what's rightfully yours, and how to illegally download the anarchist cookbook and then create a third party that rivals the current political parties by appealing to the disenfranchised people who feel abandoned by their country and government and instill in them a hope that they long thought extinguished. Then you decide to have one of your members run for office and slowly infiltrate the government. And after a few years, you use the knowledge gained from the cookbook to set up elaborate false flag operations where you make the general public believe it was an attack done by a foreign enemy, and then point out the lack of action and authority the other parties have, and eventually have a complete takeover of the government where extreme dictatorial powers are placed upon you as you go to war with other nations. Then you choose a group of people you can target and blame all the issues you've caused on to take heat off of you and your party. And then eventually you start a world war to stay in power and manipulate your cult nation more into thinking themselves superior to everyone else until it eventually culminates in you either escaping to a foreign country or committing a double suicide with your spouse that you know you only got because you set yourself up as a cult leader, and she would have never touched your 1-inch PP if you didn't have that. And you've become so narcissistic that you can't stand the thought of being shown for the fraud and monster you are to the general public, so you decide to swallow some cyanide with her. Or something like that. For today's episode, we are continuing where we left off last episode. Though these episodes are separate in a way. They're placed together like this to present an overall idea of two ideologies quarreling, that of monotheism and paganism. And again, I wanted to make these episodes distinct enough that you could listen to them separately, still kind of get the idea. But if you listen to all three together, it kind of paints like a really broad picture of how this religion's intolerance really began with Rome and the fighting that religion caused. That's the goal with it, at least. In last episode, we went over the life of Emperor Nero and how the persecution of Christians began in a very similar fashion to what I may or may not have alluded to in the beginning here with my Hitler analogy for what I teach you guys to do. So, it's just normal things. Whatever. The Christians were really just scapegoats for Nero scheming, if you don't know what I'm talking about. So today we'll go over the events after Nero, and then the life of Emperor Constantine, who is like the John Wick of Roman emperors to Christians, essentially. Which, by the way, this is a heavy NSFW and offense warning for you listeners, okay? Especially those of you that are offended easily by either me swearing or ripping on the proto-Roman Catholicism that gets its start here. I won't lie, I do have my issues with the Catholic Church. I will try my best to present the information without bias first, and then give my takes on everything at the very end. I will make a shit ton of jokes, however, during it that will be representative of some of my thoughts and beliefs. I don't hate Catholics, by the way. I don't want people to think that. Good times. Anyways, that being said, announcements and everything else is going to be at the end of today's episode. So with all that out of the way, let's get ready to fucking rumble with this historical quarrel. So, right after the suicide of Emperor Nero in AD 69, we have the Year of the Four Emperors. The year AD 69 stands as one of the most tumultuous and dramatic in Roman history, often termed the Year of the Four Emperors. Following Nero's death by suicide in 68 AD, the Roman Empire was thrown into a chaotic struggle for succession. This power vacuum led to a period of rapid turnover on the imperial throne, with 4 different men claiming the title of emperor in quick succession: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. Each had varying levels of support from different factions of the Roman army, senate, and populace, leading to an empire fraught with divisions and rebellions. Galba, the governor of Hispania, was the first to claim the throne. However, he failed to win the support of the Praetorian Guard and was murdered in the Roman Forum just 7 months into his rule. Otho succeeded Galba, but ruled for a mere 3 months. He faced opposition from Vitellius, who commanded the loyalty of legions stationed in Rhine. After a decisive defeat at the Battle of Berdiacum, Otho took his own life. Vitellius, backed by the armies of the Rhine, assumed power but quickly demonstrated incompetence and excess, making him deeply unpopular. The public was like, "Oh shit, we just had an Emperor Nero," and essentially he was the Nero 2.0. His rule was short-lived, as Vespasian, then a general leading the Roman army against the Jewish revolt in Judea, was declared emperor by his troops, which is like pretty cool. Vespasian was essentially such like a bro. All of his bros were like, "Nah, this is our fucking leader. Fuck that guy." And they're like, "But fucking we'll come and fight you guys." And they did. As Vespasian's forces, led by his son Titus, marched on Rome, Vitellius was captured and executed. His execution was brutal, as he was dragged to the Gemonian stairs, and they forced him to bite down on the stairs as they curbed his head into it. Worst part is, the first curb stomp didn't kill him, so they kept moving him down each single stair, forcing him to bite the one lower from the last one. He nearly made it to the bottom, and it took over 300 stomps to kill him. At one point, he could move, but he was still breathing, so they just placed his mouth over the stairs for him until his head split open like a fucking watermelon. That, or they just, killed him on the stairs and didn't do all that crazy shit that I was talking about. Could you fucking imagine, though? Just like, bam, Bite the curb! Bite the curb! Bite the curb, Vitellius! Bite it, you bastard! That would be hilarious. And then like they just wrote it down, and that's where we get curb stomping today. Is from that. Sorry, I like to make up shit in my head and have fun. So Vespasian, a military man with a pragmatic approach to governance, ultimately secured the throne, thereby stabilizing a chaotic empire. His rule marked the beginning of the Flavian dynasty and a return to relative normality after a year of anarchy. He embarked on ambitious building projects like the Flavian Amphitheater, which is later known as the Colosseum, and sought to restore the empire's depleted treasury from Nero's outlandish spending on his art tour and constant rebellions that he caused and then had to put down subsequently. Also, the obscene amount of olive oil used for his orgies as a makeshift lube of sorts. Everybody's jokes were getting, everybody's holes were getting stuffed with something when Nero was in charge, baby. The Year of the Four Emperors served as a stark lesson in the dangers of political instability, but also demonstrated the resilience and adaptability of the Roman state, which survived and thrived under Vespasian's subsequent decade-long reign. So, in AD 70, we have the destruction of the Second Temple in Judea. The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in AD 70 marks a pivotal moment not just in Jewish history, but also in the development of early Christianity and the Roman Empire. Led by Titus, the son of Emperor Vespasian, the Roman legions besieged and eventually captured Jerusalem after a grueling and bloody conflict. The destruction of the temple was not only a military accomplishment, but also a symbolic act aimed at crushing Jewish nationalism and religious identity. The Romans carried off the temple treasures as spoils of war, a scene famously depicted on the Arch of Titus in Rome. In the arch, you can also see how inferior the Jewish army must have been, as almost all the Roman soldiers are depicted without arms, meaning they probably conquered Judea utilizing primarily leg combat, which is very impressive. They were all masters of the high kick, and a lot of them must have been getting ready to curb stomp Vitellius once they got home, just practicing, That's why they didn't depict him with arms. So that or, the arms just fell off over time, and I'm just, reading too much into shit from art that I looked at. The ramifications of this event were profound and far-reaching. For the Jews, the loss of the temple was a devastating religious and cultural blow. It signaled the end of a centralized cultic worship and led to a transformation in Jewish religious practices, paving the way for rabbinic Judaism, which is basically just the plain old boring, I shouldn't say boring to me, Judaism, and not the cannibalistic dystopian nightmare I had originally envisioned it to be when I first read rabbinic and thought it meant something like a period of being rabid and wild because I'm fucking dumb and I forgot about the word rabbi while I was writing it and, and researching. So, applaud my stupidity, please. Thank you. The fall of Jerusalem also triggered a mass diaspora, or scattering, as Jews dispersed into various parts of the Roman Empire and beyond, an event that deeply influenced the social and religious landscape of the time. Early Christians, who were still largely considered a Jewish sect, the destruction of the temple was a significant moment. It lent credence to their belief in Jesus Christ as the Messiah and the quote-unquote new temple, or his hot Heavenly Father daddy body, for those of you uninitiated into the vaguely homoerotic scripture of John, where John describes Jesus as, quote, a God striding over the face of the earth, and repeatedly says that he was, quote, the disciple that Jesus loved, specifically him. Even though Jesus was like, I love all of you guys, but like John goes out of his way to be like, nah, Jesus loved me like more than everyone else. So dude for sure had some sort of infatuation going on. Anyways, Christ had said that the temple would be destroyed and his body was to become the new temple. So the fulfillment of this prophecy granted them further resolve in their belief, and it expedited the separation of Christianity from its Jewish roots. The diaspora led to the further spread of Christianity, as Jewish Christians also dispersed and took their beliefs with them, facilitating the religion's eventual spread into Gentile communities. In an odd parallel, this seismic event was also crucial for Rome. The suppression of the Jewish revolt and the destruction of the temple bolstered the Flavian dynasty's claims to effective rule, showcasing their capability to quell rebellions and enforce Roman authority, leading to the Romans reinforcing their beliefs in their deities, really demonstrating that people really don't give a shit about being morally correct. They care about being right or in power more. That's all that matters. For the Christians, they predicted something, so they were like, sweet. And then for the Romans, they were like, yeah, dude, God's favored us in battle. We kicked ass. So, both of them amplified their beliefs to a point. It's honestly interesting. This event also set the stage for continuing tensions and periodic revolts in Judea, which remained a difficult province for Rome to govern. The event remained etched in collective memories, shaping Jewish-Roman relations and influencing theological and political developments for centuries to come. Now we're into AD 81 to 96, which is the reign of Domitian. The reign of Emperor Domitian from AD 81 to 96 is often noted for its authoritarian governance and heightened religious tension within the Roman Empire. Domitian, unlike some of his predecessors, took an active interest in religious matters and seemed keen on promoting the traditional Roman pantheon. For him, religion wasn't just a matter of personal belief, but a tool for ensuring the unity and stability of the empire. His view saw both Christians and Jews as inherently incompatible with this vision, and his policies reflected the sentiment. Domitian is said to have initiated a series of harsh measures against Christians and Jews. In some of Domitian's most diabolical policies against Jews and Christians, he would routinely, mildly inconvenience them by having his soldiers and inspectors hold them up whenever they were in line for the Colosseum, or to go take a shit, or to go take a bath. They were the only people that were like held up, and it was just really fucking annoying. Or purposefully having his tax officers make just the Jews and the Christians' paperwork be refused for taxes, even if they got it right, leading them to getting frustrated and flustered every year because they couldn't, get their taxes on time or done on time. And so they were just like constantly stressed out. They're like, oh, fuck, I'm going to get killed because I'm not paying my taxes. Shit. And then they're like, I can't move out of the country because it's just so goddamn huge. And what was the point of moving out of the place? The place they probably moved to would also probably get conquered by the Romans, or the ruler there might suck worse, so they begrudgingly just accepted it and would refill the forms for their taxes. Truly, these were the most insidious of Domitian's policies against them. Christian traditions even suggest that Domitian was responsible for the exile of the apostle John, the one that Jesus loved, by the way, guys. Did you know that Jesus loved him? I don't think I've said that enough. To the island of Patmos, where John supposedly wrote the book of Revelation. Christians were perceived as atheists by the Romans because they didn't honor the Roman gods or the emperor, making them easy targets for scapegoating during times of crisis. Similarly, Jews faced heavy taxation and were often lumped together with Christians as quote-unquote atheists and misanthropes because of their monotheistic beliefs. Kind of akin to how Americans in the Cold War would call communists and Russia godless, despite the Russian population primarily being part of the Eastern Orthodox Church that believes in Christ and God. The facts didn't really matter. Really, the only reason for this statement was because their ideals directly contradicted the accuser's ideology of government, and both the communists, Russian communists in particular, and in the Jews and Christians points here. And so it's just, their ideology essentially pissed off the government. So Domitian's reign also saw the continued institutionalization of the imperial cult, which required the veneration of the emperor as a divine figure. This posed a direct challenge to both Jews and Christians who refused to partake in what they viewed as idolatry. The emperor's deification wasn't just ceremonial. It had significant implications for social and political life. Refusal to participate could be perceived as disloyalty to the empire, a charge that could result in persecution or death. In summary, the reign of Domitian intensified the persecution's precarious position of Christians and Jews within the Roman Empire. His emphasis on traditional Roman religious practices and the deification of the emperor put these monotheistic groups at a greater risk of persecution. Laying the groundwork for further conflict in the succeeding centuries, Domitian's policies didn't succeed in eliminating these faiths. Rather, they contributed to the complex web of social and religious dynamics that would continue to evolve long after his death. So he wasn't like actively going out his way to fuck him over. He didn't want to do that. He did want to quiet them though, and to kind of, get his people to be like, ignore these fuckers. They're not important. That's what his policies were aimed at doing. So then in AD 98 to 170, we have the reign of Emperor Trajan. Or Trajan. It's the guy that you can play in Civ 6 for Rome. If you guys play Civ 6, I don't even know. Yeah, Civilization's a video game. It's a fun video game. Check it out. But the reign of Emperor Trajan from AD 98 to 117 is often considered a high point in Roman history, marked by military conquests, infrastructure projects, and relative stability. However, his reign was also a critical period for the early Christian community, as it was Trajan who formalized the Roman policy towards Christians in a correspondence with Pliny the Younger, the governor of Bithynia Pontus. Trajan outlined what would become the standing Roman procedure. Christians were not to be actively sought out, but if they were identified and refused to recant their faith, they were to be executed. Which, is basically Trajan saying, I don't really give a fuck what you think you believe. And you can do it privately, but you will be a fucking team player if you live here, bitch, or you will fucking die. That's kind of hardcore. This approach can be seen as a moderate policy in the context of his time, especially when compared to the overt persecutions under Domitian. Yet it still made Christianity illegal and left the door open for local officials to act against Christians when they deemed it necessary, or just if they wanted to, just to fuck around with it. By requiring accused individuals to recant and participate in Roman religious rituals to prove their loyalty, the policy put Christians in an untenable position, abandoned their religious convictions, or face execution. And back then, they were pretty hardcore about it. They're like, nah, I'll just fucking die. It's what many of them chose. The implications of Trajan's policies were far-reaching. It essentially made Christianity a religio illicita, or an illegal religion, in the eyes of the Roman state at least. While the policy suggested a lack of interest in actively hunting down Christians, it placed the burgeoning community in a very precarious position. The onus was now on Christians to keep their faith a secret, meet covertly, and develop networks that could protect their members from exposure. This fostered a sense of community among early Christians, but also created a secretive culture, which could be construed as a form of resistance to Roman rule, a sort of secret cabal that many Roman citizens viewed as conspirators looking to destroy the empire from the inside slowly over time. Kind of like how Americans today believe in the Illuminati, or sadly still, the Jews or other groups of people are meeting in secret, not because society made them feel like they had to. No. No other option than to be in secret. Yeah, because if they did it publicly, they'd be harassed or something. Nothing like that. Nah, it was just totally because they were plotting something. Fucking idiots. I hate people. I hate dumbasses like that, where they're like, yeah, these these people that we've been persecuting, they're meeting in secret now. Obviously, they're conspiring to, fuck with us. And, maybe they are, because, you're fucking with them, and you kind of deserve it. You ever think about that? Or maybe they're only meeting in secret so they don't get fucked with you? Who knows? I don't know. Just use your brain a little bit. So in summary, Trajan's policy towards Christians had a shaping influence on the early Christian community. Although it wasn't a policy of active persecution, it institutionalized the illegality of Christian practices and made martyrdom a distinct possibility for followers of the faith. Thus, even under an emperor lauded for his governance, Christians found themselves negotiating a delicate balance between their spiritual commitments and the legal constraints of the empire. So AD 117 to 138, we have the reign of Hadrian. Hadrian's reign from AD 117 to 138 marked a slightly different approach to Christianity within the Roman Empire. Known for his efforts to consolidate the empire rather than expand it, Hadrian was generally more focused on cultural integration and administrative efficiency. His policy towards the Christians echoed this broader perspective. While he didn't repeal the existing laws against Christianity, which still deemed it a religio licita, or legal religion, he did adopt a more lenient stance, at least initially. Rather than actively seeking out Christians for persecution, Hadrian advised to put provincial governors to act against Christians only if they became too conspicuous or disruptive. In other words, Christians could practice their faith in relative peace as long as they did so quietly and without challenging the existing social and religious order. This policy was not so much a step towards religious freedom as it was a pragmatic choice aimed at social stability. Hadrian's empire had many pressing issues to contend with, and a religious witch hunt was not high on his list of priorities. So for my Gen Z listeners, essentially, Hadrian, who was like king, was all like, yo, Christians, no cap, y'all can feel like your truth and all, but you gotta keep it low key. Cause like if you don't and decide to start acting sus, we finna cancel your ass and clap back or unalive y'all bitches. Which listeners, no cap, for Hadrian's time, that was like woke for his time, for real, on God. I ain't trying to stand for him, but he was woke as fuck. Okay, back to my normal speech. Thank you for putting up with that. We need to make sure Gen Z, understands history, and I just want to help them by speaking their language. So, anyways. However, Hadrian's more lenient policy should not be mistaken for tolerance. Christians who became too visible still faced the risk of persecution and execution. There was also a distinction between official policy and local practice. Regional governors had a great deal of autonomy, and their attitudes towards Christians could vary widely. The Christian community, therefore, remained in a precarious position, tolerated but not accepted, and always one incident away from triggering renewed persecution. Straight up, just if like one Christian decided to go, I don't know, just like shit in the street, everyone would have been like, well, fuck it, let's kill him. So it was a dangerous time for him. In summary, Hadrian's reign did offer minor respite for the Christian community, in comparison to his predecessors especially, but it did not fundamentally alter the risky circumstances under which early Christians lived. The faith remained illegal, and the Roman state's attitude could shift swiftly from passive disregard to active persecution. As such, Hadrian's rule didn't substantially improve the legal standing of Christianity. It just simply reflected a brief period where imperial attention was directed elsewhere. They had bigger shit to take care of. But then we get into the reign of Antonius Pius, which is actually a very general peaceful time. So the reign of Antonius Pius from AD 138 to 161 is often considered one of the most peaceful and prosperous periods in Roman history. Unlike most of his predecessors and successors, Antonius did not engage in large-scale military campaigns, focusing instead on administrative reforms and the well-being of his subjects. Because he realized, maybe we're getting a little too big, guys. Maybe we shouldn't be fucking around so much. And he did the right thing. This tranquility also extended to some extent to the Christian community within the Roman Empire. Antonius Pius inherited Hadrian's more lenient approach towards Christians. Although Christianity remained an illegal religion, it appears that Antonius didn't give a fuck. He was pretty indifferent to the Christian question, which is such a fuck. I don't know why I wrote Christian. I was thinking I was going to do a joke about the Armenian question and that whole speech, but I'm not feeling it. So there are a few records of large-scale persecutions of Christians during his reign, and it seemed as though the empire had more pressing concerns than hunting down members of this still relatively small religious group. That said, Christians were not entirely free from danger. Localized persecutions did occur, often spurred by local officials or community leaders rather than imperial decree. So, again, a good comparison to this would be modern-day racism in America. While it may not be a generalized thing anymore, it may seem like we have become more tolerant due to the amount of time that the persecution was allowed to foster in the culture, there are still plenty of assholes who are super racist and actively do try and fuck with people of other races here in America, which is really sad. You can kind of compare it to that with really, I think honestly the any era after slavery was abolished, essentially, where for Black people, for African American or Black culture, they were in a very similar position to Christians with Rome, where they weren't being actively hunted against in some areas, but definitely a bunch of areas would still, like local areas. But the American government wasn't actively fucking them over anymore. So the Roman government wasn't trying to actively fuck over the Christians here. While Antonius didn't go so far as to legitimize Christianity, he did issue a rescript to the Asian provinces in which he decreed that merely being a Christian was not sufficient grounds for a death sentence. So, just being a Christian didn't mean you're going to die anymore. This did not legalize the faith, but it did offer a sliver of additional security for Christians. They couldn't just be killed just for being Christian, provided they were not actively disrupting the social or religious order. Again, just don't fuck with what we got going on and you're good. That was Antonius' whole deal. Though Christians lived under somewhat less imminent threat during this time, it's crucial to understand that these were still precarious years. Antonius' relative indifference provided some breathing room, really. And that's kind of it for the community, the Christian community. But it did not represent a turning point yet in Roman policy toward the faith. Christianity was still illegal, still regarded with suspicion, and Christians were still vulnerable to shifts in political or popular opinion. And again, very much local leaders could still fuck with them and not, get in trouble. So I mean, live, with the fear that people might just turn on them or they just get beaten, robbed, and receive no help. Living your life like that's not, it's shitty. It sucks. So, and then we get into the reign of Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from AD 161 to 180. He is often celebrated for his Stoic philosophy, encapsulated in his famous work, Meditations. I'm sure many of you have heard it. And he is probably one of the most recently misquoted historical figures of all time, with the advent of what I like to call Andrew Tate bro culture. Some of my favorite, quotes that have been attributed to him that aren't his are, when you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Another one is, the object in life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. Each day provides its own gifts. What we do now echoes in eternity. Death smiles at us, but all a man can do is smile back. Punk funk means to be one with yourself, to be rebellious, aggressive, able to do and say what you feel at all times without inflicting mental or spiritual pain. Funkers are people who dig the funk. Little funkers, big funkers, old funkers, young funkers, foxy funkers, mother funkers, papa funkers. I'm Rick James, bitch. Fuck your couch, Charlie Murphy. Those last few might have just been some Rick James quotes that I pulled from the web, and I thought it was hilarious. So to attribute to Marcus Aurelius, Rickus James Hilarious. That's the combo there. Despite his political or philosophical inclinations toward rationality and virtue, surprisingly, Marcus's reign marked a period of intensified persecution of Christians. This stands in very stark contrast to his predecessor Antonius, under whose reign Christians experienced relative calm. To be fair, the Christians were getting all uppity and in your face about it because of Hadrian's taunts. They're like, which is like just really fucking annoying. Like when that friend who isn't really your friend, but like it's just always there in your group of friends, decides to start volunteering or some shit, which is like good and all, but then they start inviting all of you to join them, and your actual friends say yes because they'd feel weird if they refuse to help people, because it's just like a shitty thing to like do. Be like, nah, I don't want to fucking go help people. And then because they all said yes, you feel pressured to say yes, and so you start volunteering with them. And while you're out there, you slowly realize you could have just donated $50 and had the same impact you just had on the people's lives. And then you start to resent your non-friend friend and question whether or not anyone would miss them if they disappeared. Anyways, in a cruel twist of irony, Marcus Aurelius, who espoused ideas of human equality and rational judgment, oversaw some of the harshest treatment of Christians, which is, just so back then, right? Like, these people would be like, hey, we're all equal, but like only, like us people that I consider who are people are equal. Oh, God, so fucked. It's like the founding fathers, like all men are created equal. Apparently not. Apparently you guys didn't really believe that because you still had slaves. So his reign was marred by various calamities, including plagues, floods, and military invasions on the frontier. In the face of these natural and man-made disasters, the Roman populace and authorities frequently sought scapegoats, and Christians just became a very convenient target. especially for the fostered hatred that Rome had at that point. They were often blamed for angering the gods, and their refusal to participate in the state religious activities was seen as impiety that invited divine wrath. Their simple existence pissed off Jupiter too much. You can't piss off Jupiter too much, guys. You gotta fuck him over and get him out, so that way Jupiter's a little more happy. I guess. The emperor's own Stoic beliefs likely contributed to this hostility, actually. Stoicism emphasized the divine nature of the state gods and the social contract that bound individuals to community norms, including religious observances. So to Marcus Aurelius, the monotheistic beliefs of Christians and the refusal to conform posed a direct challenge to the established social and religious order. This philosophical clash culminated in explicit legal sanctions and public spectacles designed to humiliate and eradicate the Christian faith. One of the most notable episodes of persecution occurred in Lyon, Gaul in AD 177, where a number of prominent Christians were arrested, publicly tortured, and executed in a series of gruesome spectacles. An example of the grotesque tortures and suffering can be told through the story of Blandina, who was a slave girl who they tried to use to get her to confess that her masters were cannibals and, I shit you not, sister fuckers. So the story goes, the hope of the adversary was strongly excited by the appearance at the bar of a slave girl, Blandina by name. Here was a fine opportunity. Of course, she knew all that went on in her mistress's family, and that all everybody said contained many a frightful deed. Only, then, use torture enough, and we shall obtain such a confession as, pertaining to this distinguished household, will prove to everybody that we are doing no more than our duty in bringing such crimes to light. The rack, which is a modern term, was freely applied, more freely still. In vain, her only confession was, I am a Christian, nothing wicked is done among us. The greater the torture, the stronger she seemed to grow. Which to me could mean either God was empowering her or she had just learned that she was a masochist and kind of enjoyed the pain, which, just kind of roll with me here. Think about that. Think about how easy that would be, and like for the Christian community at that point, just to kind of give into masochism, and be beaten a little bit. Because that's God's love right there. If you get taught that like your punishment is God loving you and strengthening you, I think it'd be a very slippery slope into masochism for sure. So taken back to prison, she spent the night in communicating her own courage to fellow prisoners, saying things like, I don't know how y'all being little bitches about this. It felt fucking amazing to me. Oh God, I can't wait to be put back on the rock. Ooh. And she squealed with excitement or something. All right, just made that part up, so don't worry about that. Okay, anyways. Produced again in public the next day and subjected to fresh torments, she said merely, I am a Christian and nothing wicked is done among us. The day of her doom was come. It was a quote-unquote Roman holiday, made such not by gladiatorial fights, but by agonies inflicted on an innocent and defenseless girl and her religious associates, a deacon called Sanctus and a fellow believer named Maturus, who were first flogged and then set on a burning iron chair. They were forced to sit their asses down on some hot metal. Fuck, dude. Oh. While Blandina, bound to a stake, had her limbs contemptuously contorted into a shape of cross. So, she got some contortion and almost rope playing going on. So, goddamn, especially if she's masochist, she must have been having a hell of a time. Thus hanging there, this slave girl uttered no complaint, begged no pity, entreated no alleviation, but simply sang praise to God for the faith he gave and implored similar support for her fellow sufferers. The executioners, according to their nature, remained unmoved, simply letting out the wild beasts on their victims. The brutes, less brutish than their human masters, drew back from the offensiveness of the half-burnt bodies. The fucking animals were grossed out by what the Romans were doing to these people. Think about that, guys. Holy shit. Thereupon, the skulls of Sanctus and Marturus were split with a poleaxe instead because the animals didn't want to eat them. And Blandina was conveyed back to prison. They were all really fucking confused why she wasn't cracking and confessing. And to be honest, probably a little freaked out at this point. I mean, think about this bitch Think about this bitch was probably suffering more than most of the prisoners had suffered. So they had to be, freaky or just something. Something was up. And among the Christian captives, there were Roman citizens asking what is to be done with them. Asked the praetor of his master. The answer was, unless they deny Christ, let them be beheaded. Remaining faithful, they suffered decapitation. Those, however, who, not being members of the Roman Empire, were accounted slaves, were put to death by the most excruciating methods. Blandina and a boy named Ponticus were first compelled to witness the execution of others. The expectation was that they would lose courage at the sight and make confession. The expectation was disappointed. Full of courage, Blandina communicated her spirit to the youth, who, after bearing his sufferings calmly, sank like a young fawn hunted to death on its native hills, and he was murdered. These over, now came Blandina's turn. By her persistence and by the spirit she communicated, she had given her torturers much trouble, and shall now receive her reward, which is apparently death. So a burning gridiron is brought forth on which she is laid. She prays and suffers, but still lives. They then roll her in a net and throw her thus entangled to a maddened bull. This lady has been tortured so completely. I mean, at this point, they should have just fucking killed her, because it's like, you're not getting anything out of this. But it is for the bull, her in a net is just a plaything for him. He gores her and tosses her about until the spectators, so just the spectators themselves, are sickened at the sight finally, and order the victim to receive the coup de grace. They're like, fucking end this, please. Thereupon she is dispatched with the sword, finally given the alleviance of death. Even the pagans allowed that never was so much heroism seen in a slave girl. The Christians looked to a higher power and gave glory to God. That was I pulled that from online from a different source. So, but I mean, goddamn, they tortured her so much. Even those assholes were like, I might go a little too far, I guess. Fucking goddamn. That is one of those stories where I have to question it, because that bitch was either way into masochism or something really was empowering her. Because I don't know how you can do that. But yeah, so even though Marcus Aurelius is often admired for his stoic wisdom and being a generally good emperor, his reign serves as a reminder that even the most philosophical of rulers can enact policies of brutal intolerance. Christians during this time suffered considerably, caught between the hammer of popular superstition and the anvil of Stoic orthodoxy, both wielded by an emperor or inclined to see them as threats rather than fellow human beings. Again, and even threats, really just fucking animals. That's how he saw them. That's how they all saw Christians back then. They're just animals they didn't want to handle. Okay, now we go to the reign of Septimus Severus from AD 193 to 211. Christians found themselves facing renewed waves of persecution. Severus, who was notably more authoritarian than some of his predecessors, aimed to consolidate power and reinforce traditional Roman values. Again, you'll kind of see this repeat consistently as we go throughout time. Lots of emperors will try to consolidate power, reinforce their beliefs and like the imperial cult, and then like a couple will give the Christians, a reprieve once they start getting fucked over by other nations. It repeats quite a bit, so have fun with this. But this led to a significant policy shift concerning religious practices in the empire. Specifically, Severus issued an edict forbidding conversions to Judaism and Christianity. The edict had severe implications for Christians who were already viewed with suspicion for their refusal to partake in the state religion and for their secretive gatherings. While prior emperors had generally turned a blind eye to the private worship, Severus sought to actively dissuade citizens from adopting monotheistic faiths that he viewed as subversive to Roman authority, which kind of was. Like as I've outlined before, especially in the last episode, it definitely was, especially with the advent of the imperial cult. Under this policy, those found proselytizing or converting to Christianity were subject to imprisonment, torture, and even execution. Severus's reign also saw the execution of some particularly notable Christians. Among them were Perpetua and Felicity, two young women from Carthage whose execution became legendary within Christian circles. Their refusal to renounce their faith, even when faced with death, made them revered martyrs in the Christian tradition. And their stories were disseminated as part of the Acts of the Martyrs, which encouraged others in the face of persecution. The intent behind Severus's edict was clearly to stifle the growth of Christianity and Judaism, religions that questioned the divine right of the emperor and rejected the Roman gods. However, the net result was often the opposite. The Stoic resolve displayed by Christian martyrs during this period attracted even more followers to the faith. They became symbols of unwavering commitment to a higher power, perceived as being far more potent than just the Roman gods. Which is fair, right? Because I'm sure many of the Romans realized they were 100% not willing to die or be tortured for the emperor or for fucking Jupiter. So even as they always have the option to, especially as they have the option to switch to a different god. So the Christians' resolve and strength must have been seen as impressive and I guess culturally pretty goddamn Roman in a way for them as well. The persecutions under Septimus Severus are significant because they represent an early attempt to legally codify opposition to Christianity and Judaism, setting a precedent for later emperors. They also marked yet another period where Christians found themselves pitted against an empire that increasingly saw them as a threat to their social stability and imperial authority. So in AD 249 to 251, gosh, there's a lot of twos right there, sorry. The Decian persecution, which again unfolded between 249 and 251, under Emperor Decius, marked a severe escalation in the state-sponsored Christian persecution. It was free range now, baby. Ooh, if you want to go fuck with Christians, you could go do it. Matter of fact, we'd be paying you for that. You get 5, 10, 15 Roman crowns for Christiania or something like that. Yeah, it got a little crazy. Decius, concerned about the weakening state of the Roman Empire due to the plague of Cyprian, which is described by Cyprian here. The plague is described as this trial, that now the bowels, relaxed into a constant flux, discharged the bodily strength that a fire originated in the marrow ferments into wounds of the fosses. They were shitting fire, guys. That the intestines are shaken with the continual vomiting, that the eyes are on fire with the injected blood. That in some cases, the feet or some parts of the limbs are taken off by the contagion of the diseased putrefaction. From the weakness arising by the maiming and loss of the body, either the gait is enfeebled or the hearing is obstructed, or the sight darkened, as profitable as a proof of faith. So, yeah, the plague was pretty fucking, it was crazy. Which, yeah, holy shit, that sounds brutal. So due to this causing 5,000 people a day who die in the Roman Empire and causing food and supply shortages, Decian was convinced that the solution to all of his issues lay in a return to traditional Roman religious practices, and issued an edict that all Roman citizens were to perform a sacrifice to the Roman gods and obtain a certificate proving they had done so. This was a calculated move aimed squarely at Christians and Jews, who would find it impossible to comply without violating their religious beliefs. The implications of Decius' edict were far-reaching. Faced with the stark choice between apostasy and severe legal penalties, many Christians found themselves in an unbearable predicament. Those who refused to perform the sacrifices were subjugated to fines, confiscation of property, and imprisonment, torture, and in extreme cases, death. The period saw a considerable number of Christians capitulate to the state's demands, leading to a crisis within the Christian community concerning how to deal with those who had lapsed, but later sought to re-entry into the church. One of the most noteworthy Christians who suffered during this period was Bishop Fabian of Rome, whose death in prison was indicative of the extreme measures being enforced. The Decian persecution also triggered a significant theological debate amongst Christians, as church leaders like Cyprian of Carthage grappled with the issue of apostasy and sought to find a merciful yet doctrinally sound approach to handle lapsed Christians. He essentially realized that, maybe it wasn't worth it to be so goddamn rigid in their beliefs. You know, like how when your spouse who eats primarily rice realizes that you weren't kidding when you said you might leave and says, I've been thinking that, maybe I could do one dinner that's different and not have rice with it. And you're like, oh, thank God. Thank you so much. You have no idea how happy that makes me. But then when you eat dinner together, you see how upset they are eating the food, and you question whether or not you're being too selfish, or if they are just so accustomed to eating rice that eating anything else actually causes them pain. And that's why they're crying while they're eating the hamburger. And, maybe it's just a time thing that eventually it won't hurt them to eat non-rice foods. So you don't say anything, you carry on with your life because you're kind of an asshole and are just really happy you can eat an actual fucking hamburger again and not have to deal with rice. I will keep comparing this religion to a rice-eating spouse in the next episode too. Don't worry, that it's going to continue. I know it's y'all's favorite bit, so that's what I do. That's what Daddy Tyler does for you. Okay. In the grander scheme of Roman history, the Decian persecution stands as a testament to the immense pressures facing the empire at this time, including economic difficulties, foreign invasions, and political instability. Decius sought to unite his subjects under the banner of traditional Roman religiosity, but the severe enforcement of this edict only highlighted the deep divisions between Rome and its Christian population. Moreover, rather than quelling Christianity, the persecution under Decius had the paradoxical effect of reinforcing the Christian community's resolve and sense of identity, as the faith continued to grow even amid its trials. It's that good old Christian doctrine of God's making you see his love through your pain. The classic doctrine there. That's what God wants. He wants you to suffer, apparently. And then moving on, we have the Valerian persecutions that transpired between AD 253 and 260. So 7 years of this shit. We're another grim chapter in the fraught relationship between Christians and the Roman Empire. Emperor Valerian, initially intolerant towards Christians, radically shifted his stance for reasons that remain subject to scholarly debate. Some theories poise that Valerian aimed to consolidate his rule and restore Rome's former glory by uniting his citizens under the traditional Roman pantheon. Others suggest the influence of anti-Christian advisors or a belief that Christians undermined Roman military security by refusing to participate in state religious rituals. Essentially, he either purposely did it to gain more power and unity for Rome, or he bought into conspiracy theories that the Christians were planning on fucking over his rule somehow. Despite being a minority community, he was probably like, "Oh shit, yeah, they're hiding in secret. Why are they hiding in secret? Obviously to kill me." Not because they've just went through a bunch of shit with Decius and the past couple hundred years at this point. Valerian issued edicts that specifically targeted Christian leaders and clerics, ordering their execution and calling for the confiscation of Christian properties. Prominent figures like Pope Sixtus II and Deacon Lawrence were among those executed, dramatically signaling the state's willingness to dismantle the organizational structure of the early Christian church. These measures were not just punitive, they were also strategic, aiming to decapitate the Christian community by eliminating its leadership. He cut the snake at its head! And that's what he was doing. He was cutting that snake, getting it all killed and shit. In addition to the human toll, the confiscation of Christian properties had long-term repercussions. Many meeting places and community centers were taken over by the state, disrupting the social fabric of the early Christian communities. This period marked a harsh setback for the Christian faith within the Roman Empire, stretching the resources of the church and subjecting its members to severe hardships. However, as with earlier persecutions, the Valerian persecutions had unintended consequences for Rome. Far from crushing Christianity, the relentless trials seemed to embolden the faith of many followers, which is why I honest to God believe that Christians developed this odd masochistic belief that suffering is divine favor granted by God to make you stronger. It's an odd way of him showing you love by testing your resolve. It seems like it just became a way for them to rationalize the 200 years of torture and persecution at the hands of the Romans. That's my opinion. Why that's such a prominent thing in most Christian communities, where they're like, yeah, God gives you trials and tribulations to make you better. Why? He doesn't need to. I don't need it. Maybe trials and tribulations just happen because people are shitty. And you have to learn how to cope and deal with it. Not because God wanted you to be better or something. It's weird. Anyways, this was really strengthening the Christian community's sense of unity and fortifying the resolve to survive and grow. Furthermore, the cruel treatment of Christians began to invite sympathy and questions among non-Christian Romans, who started to see the state's actions as extreme and unjust. But, it's a little late for that, right? Like, they've been torturing, like really torturing these Christians for the past couple hundred years. And I guess these guys' grandkids were like, guys, this is a little fucked, right? They finally realized it. I mean, it's also fair. Sounds like people began to realize that the Christians were just people like them and weren't actively hurting anyone. Yet. I say that because the sad reality is that this story will be very much representative of a cycle of abuse, and we'll begin to see the abused become abusers themselves. The persecution only came to an end when Valerian was captured by the Persians in 260 AD, an event that led to a reversal in policies under his son Gallienus. Yet the memory of these brutal years would remain etched in Christian consciousness, serving as both a grim reminder of past struggles and a testament to the resilience of their faith. Okay, now we have the reign of Emperor Aurelian from AD 270 to 275, which was a significant period for Rome, but a very fleeting moment of reprieve for the Christian community. Aurelian was known as a restorer of the world, credited with bringing the Roman Empire back from the brink of collapse by reunifying its fractured territories. As part of his larger vision for a united and strong empire, he sought to rebuild and amplify the Temple of Sol, dedicated to the sun god Sol Invictus. This was a clear signal of his intent to bolster the state religion and the traditional Roman pantheon. The move was more than just architectural, it was symbolic, aimed at restoring prominence of Roman religious practices over the emerging Christian faith and other religious sects. Had his plans come to fruition, the grandeur and significance of the Temple of Sol would likely have provided a rallying point for paganism and could have led to another surge of persecution against Christians who refused to engage in a state-endorsed worship of Roman gods. Aurelian's political and military talents were beyond question, but his vision for a religiously unified Roman Empire was never realized. His life and reign were abruptly cut short when he was assassinated in 275 AD. By the way, the reasons for his murder are not entirely clear, but are generally attributed to a conspiracy by senior officers. The story goes that Aurelian really liked traditional Spartan practices and would routinely fuck his officers' buttholes. And eventually they all started to realize that maybe it wasn't for military training and that Aurelius just liked their tight little buttholes. And so they felt betrayed by him because that was the only reason they let him fuck him. They're like, oh, well, I mean, if it's to strengthen our military core and if we have to be examples of it, that's fine. But then they realized that no one else was doing it. So they had an assassin stab Aurelian in his ass 23 times for each time that they were each individually fucked. So, maybe not that. But the officers were, the officers were misled by Aurelian's secretary into thinking Aurelian was going to assassinate them, which is the actual theory. The Aurelian secretary essentially conspired to get Aurelian killed by tricking his officers into thinking that Aurelian wanted to assassinate them. So it's just a weird back and forth thing. I like to just think that, Aurelian got stabbed in the ass 23 times. Let's just have fun with that. Let's just think that's the real event that happened. Who knows? It's going to be the next Assassin's Creed game. His death effectively put an end to his ambitions for the Temple of Sol and his vision for the centralization of the Roman religious establishment. So in hindsight, the Aurelian's untimely death can be seen as a brief respite for Christians. His successors did not immediately take up his religious project with the same fervor, which allowed Christianity some room to breathe and continue its growth and not get fucked over again when the government was like, guys, we really got to start pumping out. We got to get people believing in the emperor again. They need to think I'm God, baby. I got to get that God money going. So while the Roman Empire would still experience periods of intense Christian persecution, the abrupt end of Aurelian's reign arguably delayed these developments, providing a temporary but significant pause in the tensions between the state and emerging Christian community. So then this is the big one, though. This is where things are going to get a little crazy. And by the way, Constantine was born during that time. We'll go back to Constantine's birth here in a second. I just need to set the stage here a little bit. So we have the Diocletian Tetrarchy. which was from AD 284 to 305. It marked one of the darkest chapters in the history of early Christianity. Emperor Diocletian. Fuck! I looked up the name. I'm just going through this. I don't have time to go look at it right now. I have a pronunciation guide for some names, but anyways, he's best known for his administrative reforms and stabilization of the Roman Empire. He unleashed a systemic and brutal campaign against Christians. This was part of a larger effort to fortify the empire against both internal dissent and external threats. With Diocletian believing that Christian nonconformity weakened Roman religious and social unity. So, woohoo! Let's get back into some good old Christian surfer porn here. Under Diocletian's rule, Christian persecution reached new levels of intensity and organization. That's right. They were organizing groups now to persecute them. They were getting mobs together. Churches were razed to the ground. Scriptures were burned, and countless followers of the faith were either imprisoned, tortured, or killed. The edicts issued against Christians during this period were devastatingly comprehensive. Not only were Christians removed from any official position or employment, just standard persecution, but they were also denied legal rights and subjected to gruesome executions, very gruesome, if they refused to recant their faith. So Diocletian's persecutions were fueled by his belief that the Roman gods were angered by the neglect of traditional religious practices, and that this was the reason behind the empire's series of military defeat and natural calamities, and their empire getting broken up, and him needing to split it into essentially two empires because, Christians were fucking them over with pissing off the gods and such, and definitely not because they sucked or anything, or maybe other militaries were just getting stronger and they were, slacking a little bit. They had to find someone to blame. And with the amount of scapegoating that happens in this episode, it actually led me to write a poem or a song about it. And I want to share it with you guys because I felt very inspired while I was writing this. So here we go. Gotta get this real quick. Out on the street, the sky's so wide. Real love the chase, can't keep it inside. Scapegoating, oh, it's where I wanna be. My heart is at home when I'm on a murder spree. Scapegoating, murdering. A dance with giants, just you and me. The wind in our hair, the blood on our skin. Scapegoating, oh, let the adventure begin. We hear a prayer, a not so silent plea, to spare their life, but end disastrously. Should one escape the blame for failure I would take, so there must be erased for the faults I have raked. Scapegoating, murdering. A dance with giants, just you and me. The wind in our hair, the blood on our skin. Scapegoating, oh, let the adventure begin. Oh, the tales we'll tell of our God's majesty, of the races we've slain and the friends we'll always be. With every day we learn to torture anew, our lives best lived with a gruesome view. Scapegoating, murdering, a dance with giants, just you and me. The wind in our hair, the blood on our skin. Scapegoating, oh, let the adventure begin. So hoist up the cross, let's catch the next fool. In this world of heretics, it's so easy to be cruel. Scapegoating, oh, well, life is a grin. Our hearts find their joy as another journey begins. So now I am positive that many of you are asking, did he just really make a full almost, let's see, how long was that? 2-minute song to fuck with us about scapegoating? Yes. Yes, I did. And that is the sort of commitment you get on Historical Quarrels, okay? You probably won't get that in very many other podcasts where they, creatively come up with a really stupid fucking song to another song that they found online that they can use for free. Just like, and you just add lyrics to it and do like a really shitty impersonation of Frank Sinatra or something. I don't even know what I was going with there. It was kind of like a little bit of Elvis mixed with some Frankie there. So yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome, listeners. That's what I do. That's what I fucking do. Anyways, Diocletian's attempts to revive and enforce the state religion included not just the persecution of, I'm sorry, I worked really hard on that. I hope you appreciated it. Anyways, not just the persecution of Christians, but also the promotion of the Roman gods through various state rituals and the construction of new temples. The emperor was so dedicated to these religious reforms that he abdicated the throne in 305 AD, believing that his mission had been accomplished. However, the severity of the Diocletianic persecution, God damn, I really needed to look up his name and like the pronunciation. I'm probably fucking it up. I'm sorry. I am fucking it up right now. I actually came up with like a pronunciation guide for this episode, but I forgot to get his name added in, I guess. So anyways, persecution had unintended consequences. Instead of eradicating Christianity, it galvanized the Christian community. The acts of martyrdom were seen as testaments to the unwavering faith of its followers, attracting more converts and generating sympathy among some segments of the Roman populace. Moreover, after Diocletian stepped down, the empire was left without a strong, unifying leader, setting the stage for the eventual rise of Constantine and the monumental changes that he would bring to the Roman Empire's relationship with Christianity. All right, so let's hop backwards now in the timeline just a little bit and follow the life of Emperor Constantine. So Constantine the Great was born around AD 272 in the city of Nisus, present-day Nice in Serbia. His father, Flavius Constantinus, was a high-ranking Roman officer who would later become the Roman Emperor Constantius I. His mother, Helena, was of more humble origins, but would later be canonized as a saint in the Christian tradition. Constantine's birth came during a time when the Roman Empire was grappling with both internal strife and external threats. The empire was far from the unified monolith it had once been. Instead, it was a patchwork of cultures, religions, and languages. Flavius Constantinus was often away on military campaigns, leading to a somewhat estranged relationship with his son. Yeah. It's a good thing to do, right? That's what you gotta do. Constantine's early years were marked by typical education and military training, expected for someone of his status. However, his family background was complex. His father would eventually divorce Helena to marry Theodora, the stepdaughter of Emperor Maximian. So, it's just, you gotta abandon that just to further his political career. That's what you gotta do when you want to rise up the ladder of politics in Rome. You gotta be fucking everyone. This act was a sign of the shifting sands of Roman political life, where alliances could be made and broken quickly, often at the expense of personal relationships. The Roman Empire during Constantine's youth was a religiously diverse entity. While the traditional Roman gods continued to be worshipped, there were also thriving communities of Christians, Jews, and adherents of various Eastern religions. Constantine was born into a world where religious pluralism was the norm, but also where Christians were often persecuted, kind of paradoxically with those two, where it's like, for most things, the Romans are like, yeah, no, we're cool with it, but fuck Christians. And then Constantine's probably like, but why? It's like, we're cool with like all of this other shit. Yeah, but fuck the Christians, essentially was what he's being told. These early exposures to religious diversity would significantly influence Constantine's later policies and decisions. The circumstances of Constantine's youth, the fragmented state of the Roman Empire, his family's complex political maneuverings, and the religious diversity he witnessed served as a unique backdrop for the young Roman. These factors would later shape his vision for a unified empire under a single religion. Constantine's early life laid the groundwork for his future actions, which would ultimately lead to the end of persecution. of Christians and the establishment of Christianity as the empire's dominant faith. So we can basically attribute all the good stuff that, for Christians and like the stopping of persecutions to this guy being born, almost a savior in a way, like a second Jesus of sorts, a second coming for them of sorts. Surprised he wasn't, portrayed in that light ever by people. And that probably did happen. Okay, so now moving kind of back over to Diocletian's tetrarchy here. So like in his reign with the crazy shit he was doing to Christians. So in AD 293, another pivotal moment for the Roman Empire's governance unfolded with the formal establishment of the tetrarchy. This innovative system aimed to bring stability to an empire rife with internal conflicts and external pressures. Under the tetrarchy, the empire was divided into western and eastern halves, each ruled by an Augustus or senior emperor. They were like, for Americans, you have the president and the vice president. So Augustus was the president, and then the Caesar was the vice president, essentially, or a junior emperor. Constantine's father, Constantinius Chlorus, was appointed as Caesar of the Western Roman Empire. So he was the VP of the western half under the senior Augustus Maximian, probably because he boned his sister. Yeah, that's what you gotta do, man. You see, he told you just bone the sister, and apparently of the president, and then bam, you're VP for some reason. This event had profound implications for the trajectory of Constantine's life. Constantinius Chlorus' appointment as Caesar was a significant elevation in status for the family, further solidifying their foothold in the political landscape of the Roman Empire. It pulled Constantine more closely into the realm of imperial politics and bestowed upon him the expected duties and responsibilities of a son of a Caesar. In this role, his father was tasked with defending the frontier, particularly in Gaul and Britain, which would have required Constantinius to spend extended periods away from home, thereby impacting his relationship with Constantine, and probably why he's not a saint and why Helena is a saint instead. Because, that's what good fathers do. They abandon their kids just to make sure they're raised with just the right amount of resentment towards them. Because if you don't do that, you're fucking over your kids if you think about it. If they don't have enough resentment towards you, how could they grow to be better than you? They need to have a little bit of hatred in themselves to make sure that they push themselves to be better than you. Or, I don't know, maybe that's completely wrong and I shouldn't be raising my child at all. I'm kidding. I'm not raising my kids like that. That's fucked. I love my kids. I like spending time with them. So, though the tetrarchy was designed to bring stability, it also created new avenues for political rivalry and intrigue. The system relied heavily upon the cooperation and competence of each tetrarch. In a power vacuum where dispute could quickly escalate into a full-blown crisis. Constantine would grow up in this politically charged atmosphere, gaining firsthand experience of the empire's complexities and challenges. He got into the Game of Thrones, essentially, of Roman politics. The tetrarchy also marked a time of religious upheaval, especially for Christians. As previously stated, Diocletian and his subordinate Galerius were notoriously intolerant of Christianity, escalating the persecutions against them, while Constantinus Chlorus was said to be more lenient towards Christians. The overarching policy of the empire was one of suppression and persecution. So even though, like the other Caesar, the vice president, didn't really give a shit, since the main Augustus, or one of the main Augustuses, was like fucking over Christians, everyone kind of had to try and fuck over Christians. This context would later provide a striking contrast to Constantine's eventual religious tolerance and promotion of Christianity, though a big part of that may have been because of his father's lenience towards the Christians. So then in AD 305, an event of paramount importance took place that would reverberate through the corridors of Roman power. The simultaneous abdication of both Diocletian and Maximian, the Augusti of the Eastern and Western Roman Empire, respectively. This was unprecedented, as Roman emperors rarely relinquished power voluntarily. The abdication was part of Diocletian's grand plan to ensure a smooth transition of authority, adhering to the tetrarchy system he had established years prior. This was basically him being like, no, I don't care. Like, I'm done. I've done what I need to do. I need to make sure that this system works. So we're going to step down and we're going to hand over to the next person that we've worked with and trained for this role. So, cool. So with Maximian's abdication, Constantine Chlorus, previously as Caesar, and Constantine's father, was elevated to the status of Augustus of the Western Roman Empire. For Constantine, his father's new role as Augustus dramatically amplified the family's influence and standing. So he was now the prince, essentially. It moved them closer to the epicenter of Roman politics and increased the likelihood that Constantine himself might one day assume a position of considerable power. The promotion meant that Constantius Chlorus would now take on even greater responsibilities, including the defense and administration of a larger swath of the empire. This would have placed additional burdens on his family, including Constantine, who would have been expected to play a part in the governance and defense of the realm. However, Constantius' promotion was not without its challenges. As Augustus, he inherited the problems and pressures that came with running half of the Roman Empire. One major issue was the continued tension between the pagan majority and the growing Christian minority. And it's growing. They're growing. So while Constantius was known for his more lenient stance towards Christians, the broad policy of the empire had been less favorable towards them. These were divisive issues that would later deeply influence Constantine's own religious and political decisions. In all honesty, the boy was probably just confused as fuck about what to make of the Christians. At first, due to the culture, especially that he grew up in, which is probably why, overall, he at first had we will hear him say that he has a vision of Apollo later, and not anything pertaining to Christian beliefs before the Battle of Milvian. But I don't know, the hatred that was going on and the persecution towards the Christians and that culture, especially in where he lived, must have really affected him, or at least made him scared to admit that maybe he was kind of interested in it. But it's also kind of a rebellion thing too against the societal norms. So I could see a teenager being no, I'm gonna go check out Christianity because everyone else says it sucks. So fuck you, dad. Shit like that. Anyway, sorry. That was a tangent. The shift in power also meant a realignment of alliances and the potential for conflicts, as different factions within the military and the court would have their own preferred candidates for the role of Augusti and the Caesars. Thus, the political landscape that Constantine found himself in was very complex, web of allegiances and rivalries, which served as a crucial learning experience for him. I mean, straight up, he needed to learn how to handle that, because if he didn't know how to handle that, would have been bad. Okay. And then in the year 306, just a year after Constantius takes over as Augustus, he dies. So the year 8306 was a pivotal one for Constantine, marked by the death of his father, Constantinus Chlorus, in York, Britain. Constantius was campaigning in Britain against the Picts, a group of Celtic-speaking peoples, when he fell seriously ill and died. Just his death sparked immediate upheaval, leaving a power vacuum in the Western Roman Empire. Yet the troops stationed in Britain didn't hesitate. They proclaimed Constantine as Augustus, essentially declaring him the senior emperor of the Western Roman Empire, just to replace his dad. For Constantine, this was both an honor and a very precarious position to be in. Being named Augustus by his troops demonstrated his popularity and the respect he commanded in the military. It's kind of very similar to Vespasian, how the military is nah, we want Vespasian to lead. And so these guys were nah, we want Constantine to lead. This guy kicks ass. So, however, it also thrust him into a complex, high-stakes game of politics. He was not the designated successor initially, and his claim to the throne was not without challengers, most notably Maxentius, the son of Maximian. This bold move by the troops forced Constantine to either seize the moment or potentially lose the opportunity to rule. Being proclaimed Augustus in such a manner also threw into sharp relief the unresolved tensions within the Roman Empire. The tetrarchy system set up by Diocletian was showing cracks, unable to ensure a smooth transition of power as intended. And just as his father had to navigate the delicate religious landscape of Christians and pagans, so too would Constantine. His claim to power rested on a delicate balance that could easily tip into conflict, both military and ideological. The repercussions of Constantius' death and Constantine's subsequent proclamation as Augustus would really begin to start fucking him over later. So let's move a few years later. So in 310 AD, Constantine experienced what he described as a vision of Apollo while he was in Gaul, or modern-day France, for those of you who like to know that. This was a significant event, as the visions or omens were often taken as divine guidance in ancient Rome. For Constantine, who was navigating a myriad of political and military challenges, such an occurrence could be seen as a reassuring sign of divine favor. At the time, the vision appeared to affirm his belief in the Roman gods and the conventional religious practices of the empire. However, his vision of Apollo stands in contrast to the Christian vision that Constantine would later claim to have experienced before the pivotal battle of Milvian Bridge in AD 312. Because, I don't know, man, this kind of fucks with me a little bit. It makes me wonder if Constantine was just being more savvy by utilizing Christian support in some instances, and maybe the sign was it was a way to bolster his troops' morale and get them to feel like a god was helping them at that immediate time. I don't know. We'll go over that more here in a second. While the Apollo vision seemed to solidify Constantine's commitment to the Roman pantheon, it did not offer any revolutionary change in religious policy or governance. It's intriguing to consider whether this vision played a role in his later religious evolution. Maybe he was I thought that was Apollo, but maybe it was Jesus. Who knows? There's not that much written about it. And I tried looking shit up, but nothing got really fully explained. It was just yeah, this happened. I was like, explain more, please. I want to know, did he, try to retcon this later? But apparently not. Maybe Apollo's real too, guys. It's Apollo and Jesus competing against each other. So was it part of a journey of a spiritual exploration, or did it represent a form of divine endorsement that Constantine felt compelled to acknowledge, but not necessarily follow to the exclusion of other beliefs? Who knows? I don't. Apparently a lot of people don't. So the vision in Gaul also speaks to the complex religious landscape of the Roman Empire. With polytheism still being the norm and monotheistic religions gaining ground, and with Constantine getting an advisor who was pushing for Christian inclusion and the lessening of persecution, definitely was influencing him at the time. So now let's move 2 years later. So we have the vision before Milvian Bridge. So prior to the battle with Maxentius, which kind of already alluded to, the son of Maximian. Here in 3D A12, we see the pivotal moment in the history of Roman Christianity. On the eve of the battle of Milvian Bridge, Constantine, then one of the tetrarchs fighting for control of the Western Roman Empire, reportedly experienced a transformative vision. According to historical accounts, primarily from the Christian writer Lactantius, and later from Eusebius, Constantine and his army saw a cross of light in the sky, accompanied by the inscription in the sign, Conquer. Taking this as a divine sign, Constantine had his soldiers paint the Christian symbol, either a cross or the chihro, on their shields. So those depictions of paladins in video games where their shields have crosses on them. It comes from this moment. It's kind of crazy. It's worth noting that the scholars debate the authenticity and details of this vision, as Constantine was not baptized until he was on his deathbed, and initially continued to pay homage to the Roman sun god Sol Invictus. However, the impact of the purported vision was immediate and profound. Because in 1313 AD, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, which we'll get into. But so let's continue on with the battle. So, kind of like I stated at the beginning, on the eve of October 28th, the atmosphere was thick. 312. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Constantine prepared to face off against Maxentius at Milvian Bridge, situated just north of Rome. This battle was a seminal event that would decide the fate of the Western Roman Empire. According to Christian historian Eusebius, Constantine had the vision, had his men, draw the cross on their shields and get ready to go fuck up people. So taking the vision as the divine sign, Constantine commanded his soldiers to mark shields, go forward. Lactantius also describes this event, although his account differs slightly, stating that Constantine was instructed in a dream to mark the heavenly sign on the shields. So, not just Constantine came up with it, but an angel or someone instructed him to mark the shields that way. But both versions agree on the significant role this divine intervention played. So it seems like he did, Constantine did see something and it really did impact him. Maybe not as profoundly as Christian authors would like you to believe, but it impacted him significantly. He seems to have done something about it. The battle that followed seemed to prove the vision accurate as Constantine's forces soundly defeated Maxentius, who drowned in the Tiber River during his retreat. Constantine's victory at Milvian Bridge was more than just a military success. It was perceived as validation of the Christian god's power, marking the beginning of Constantine's transformation from a pagan ruler to a Christian emperor. Because, if the Christian god can, help us win battles, and that was what was important, is that the Christian god helped them win wars. Not just taught them to suffer, like everyone else believed. The result of the battle had immediate political implications, giving Constantine sole control over the Western Roman Empire. It also changed the emperor's relationship with Christianity, transitioning from a stance of tolerance to one of active favor. Christian gods can help you win. You gotta go, celebrate that shit and help them out. However, historians have long debated the sincerity of Constantine's conversion. Some argue that it was a genuine spiritual experience, while others poise that it may have been a calculated political move. The historian Ramsay MacMullen, for example, argues that Constantine's adoption of Christianity was likely influenced by both personal belief and political expediency. Constantine himself, in later writings and actions, seemed to oscillate between deep Christian piety and pragmatic tolerance for pagan practices within his empire. So, as he stood triumphant at Milvian Bridge, the tides of history were unmistakably turning. The victory would serve as a prelude to one of the most transformative legal reforms in Roman history, the Edict of Milan, as I had previously mentioned. This edict would not only change the status of Christians within the empire, but would also set the stage for Christianity to become the dominant religious, cultural, and political force in the Western civilization. Okay, now we're here. This edict is the edict that, essentially starts switching up Christians. They're not being persecuted and fucking killed all the time anymore after this. So a dramatic turn of fate for Christianity occurred with the Edict of Milan. The edict was a joint decree issued by Constantine, who had consolidated his rule over the Western Roman Empire, and Licinius, who was the Augustus of the Eastern Roman Empire at the time. It was a groundbreaking piece of legislation that granted religious tolerance to all religions in the empire, effectively ending the state-sponsored persecution of Christians. This was a seismic shift from earlier Roman policy, which had often subjected Christians to varying levels of persecution. The text of the Edict of Milan has not survived in its entirety, but excerpts preserved in the works of Christian apologists Lactantius and the historian Eusebius indicate that the edict aimed to rectify the injustices done to Christians. It called for the restoration of confiscated church properties and established the legality of Christian practices. Kind of like reparations in a way, what reparations would be for the American, modern system for slavery, essentially. It's kind of it's Constantine being like, oh man, my people sucked. I'm sorry, guys. Here you go. Gave them the shit back. So by doing so, it laid the groundwork for Christianity's unprecedented expansion, and within a few decades, the faith would become deeply integrated into the Roman state. The Edict of Milan did more than just protect Christians. It was an affirmation of religious pluralism, stating that all religions could be freely practiced in the Roman Empire. While it did not make Christianity the state religion, that would happen later, in 380 AD. It removed the legal obstacles that had hindered the faith's growth. The edict's significance is multi-layered, affecting not just the immediate political religious landscape, but also shaping the concept of religious tolerance in Western legal thought. So, essentially, the reason why a lot of people today now believe, you should just let people believe in what they want to believe is because of, this law that gets passed. Even though it kind of gets shit on later, and we'll get into that. So, 3 years later, we have Constantine begins his rivalry with Licinius. The amicable relationship that they had began to sour, and just a few years after the joint issue of the Edict of Milan, despite their alliance sealed by the edict and even familial ties, Constantine had given his sister, Constantina, in marriage to Licinius. The two emperors found themselves increasingly at odds, both politically and religiously. The core of the tension was multifaceted. On the political front, both emperors were ambitious and aimed to consolidate their respective power bases. Licinius saw Constantine's growing influence and successes in the West as a threat to his own rule in the East. Which, it's like, it kind of makes sense, but at the same time, you're under the same nation. The whole point was because the empire got too big. That's why it got divided in half. But this should have been expected. As soon as you give, someone else in charge of an entire territory, and they're both equal, it's easier to kind of split it up and, fight to try and it's whatever. Okay. In the backdrop of these political tensions was a divergence in religious ideology. Constantine was moving towards embracing Christianity, not just as a permitted religion, but as a faith that had divine backing. Something evident in his public works and affiliations. Licinius, on the other hand, was less enthusiastic about this Christianization and began to favor the traditional Roman pantheon. Historical accounts such as those by Eusebius suggest that Licinius started to rescind some of the religious freedoms granted by the Edict of Milan, leading to renewed persecution of Christians in the Eastern Roman Empire. Such moves did not sit well with Constantine, who saw himself as a protector of Christians. He was like, yo, hold up, Licinius. Christian God, help me get where I'm at today, right? Like, I owe him a little bit. I owe his people some protections, okay? And you're fucking with him. I don't like that. And tensions finally boiled over, culminating in military conflicts between the two rulers. While the first set of conflicts were resolved somewhat diplomatically, they set the stage for future battles, and both emperors realized that the ideological and political schisms between them were too wide to bridge simply through treaties or familial alliances. So, rivalry between them was more than just a personal feud. It was indicative of the deeper shifts that were taking place within the Roman Empire. Tensions between the old pagan traditions and emerging Christian ideology was becoming increasingly irreconcilable, and it was only a matter of time before one would have to give way to another. So, in AD 324, we have the defeat of Licinius. The ideological and political chasm between Constantine and Licinius had reached its breaking point. The culmination of their long-standing rivalry came in the form of the Battle of Chrysopolis. Constantine led his troops across the Bosphorus and clashed with Licinius' forces near the city of Chrysopolis, present-day Üsküdar in Turkey, by the way, for those of you who want to know. The battle wasn't merely a test of military might. It represented the conflict between two different visions for the Roman Empire. One rooted in traditional paganism, and the other driven by emerging Christian ideals. Essentially, this battle is what kind of decided if Christianity was going to live or die, right? Because if Licinius won, I don't think there would have been Christianity anymore. I think they would have gotten fucking murdered, and it would have stopped it. Judaism might have still existed just because it's really hard to control that territory, and the Romans had found that out. So, so it kind of gets crazy here. Ancient sources like Eusebius paint a vivid picture of the battle, describing how Constantine's army was vastly outnumbered, but fought with divine vigor, seemingly convinced of the righteousness of the cause. True paladins or crusaders, like from the Diablo franchise, the Crusader. Just imagine a bunch of those dudes just going in and charging and fucking people up. That's essentially what was happening here with Constantine's army. They were destroying vast hosts. According to these accounts, Constantine attributed his military success to the Christian God again, reinforcing his commitment to the Christian faith. Licinius, meanwhile, suffered not just a military defeat, but also the collapse of his vision for the Roman Empire. God damn, dude. I'm not tired. Okay, after the battle, Licinius was initially spared, largely due to the intercession of his wife, Constantina, who was also Constantine's sister. And, when your sister tells you not to kill her husband, you probably should listen. Even if that husband's been an asshole to you and definitely tried to kill you. I still don't want to fuck over. You don't want to make your sister sad. You gotta keep her happy. So he was just exiled to Thessalonica and stripped of his power. That's all. But within a year, he would be executed on charges of conspiring to regain the throne. So, he was allowed to live and decided just to, fuck living and want a power back. Which, I kind of get. I imagine if I had that sort of power and it was stripped away from me, I'd also hate that. His defeat marked the end of a divided Roman Empire and set the stage for Constantine's uncontested rule. Constantine's victory at Chrysopolis had far-reaching implications. As the sole ruler of a reunified Roman Empire, he was now free to advance his religious agenda without the complications of a divided government. Essentially, he had no one telling him no. He's like, no one can, fight me anymore on this shit. If I want Christian God to be the main God, and I want Christian God to have his own protections, then I'm going to protect the Christian God, goddammit. It's essentially, which is crazy. Moreover, the defeat of Licinius served as a clear signal that the era of Christian persecution was nearing its end, making way for the religion's integration into the fabric of the Roman governance and society. And then in 325 AD, we have the Council of Nicaea. Now this is where I have a lot of issues with the Catholics, okay? So, in AD 325, Constantine took an extraordinary step to address the divisions within Christianity by convening the First Council of Nicaea. The council's most pressing matter was the Arian controversy, a theological dispute that had been causing schisms within the Christian community. Arius, a priest from Alexandria, asserted that Jesus Christ was created by God and therefore subordinate to him. This view clashed with the Orthodox belief that Jesus was, essentially the same as God the Father, leading to the intense theological debates that threatened the unity of the burgeoning faith. This was more than a religious issue, it was a matter of imperial stability. Christianity had gained immense influence by this time, especially after Licinius died. They went to work. They went to work getting in there and, reorganizing and getting their power involved, and also to kind of ensure they wouldn't get fucked over again, which is fair, with local politics and whatnot. So, but yeah, this was more than just a religious issue. It was a matter of imperial stability. Really, that's really truly what it was. Constantine sought to bring uniformity to Christian doctrine, and in doing so, maintain the peace and unity of his empire. He didn't want to have violence going on. So the council was attended by hundreds of bishops from across the empire who were invited to debate, vote, and ultimately establish a unified doctrine. So this wasn't anything where people are being divinely inspired, and maybe the bishops were praying, but overall Constantine just had a lot of the shit done just to stop the unrest that was happening by people fighting over this. Ancient historians like Eusebius provide insight into the proceedings of the council, which included the creation of the Nicene Creed, a formal statement of Christian beliefs that explicitly rejected Arianism. This creed served not only as a theological guide, but also a political tool for Constantine, who sought to strengthen the social fabric of an empire still recovering from years of internal strife. The Council of Nicaea was groundbreaking for several reasons. It was the first ecumenical council of the Christian church, setting a precedent for future councils to resolve doctrinal issues. It was here, listen, if you guys want to fight about it, this is how you fight about it, and this is how you decide things. It also solidified, the role of the emperor as the divine arbiter in religious matters, reinforcing the intertwining of church and state in the Roman Empire. And this is where a lot of issues, I think, happen. Because the church got so involved with the government, this is where they'll start to get this perceived idea of power, and they're able to root out people who could challenge them and potentially persecute them again. And the cycle of abuse continues to repeat, with the abused becoming the abuser and abusing new people. Lots of fun, man. So then in 330, we had, following Constantine's life now, because that's kind of the end for the religious debate for now. We'll kind of get more into it, but we're going to go over the rest of Constantine's life, and then we'll go into my takeaways. So, in AD 330, Constantine took a monumental step that would redefine the landscape of the Roman Empire and Christian world by refounding the ancient city of Byzantium as Constantinople. This was more than just a city. It was envisioned as a quote-unquote new Rome, strategically located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. The refounding was accompanied by a series of grand ceremonies that emphasized the city's newfound importance. The decision to establish a new capital wasn't arbitrary. It reflected the shifting geopolitical landscape and the empire's evolving priorities. They had a lot more priorities now. So Constantine saw in Byzantium an opportunity to create a fresh start for an empire that had been fought with internal divisions and external threats. Location was very strategic, controlling vital trade routes and easily defensible thanks to its natural harbor and surrounding waterways. Historians like Sozomen describe how the emperor walked the city's future borders himself. as if guided by divine providence, outlining a much grander city than Byzantium had ever been. Seriously, like the way the Christians treat Constantine, he's like some sort of like holy warrior that shouldn't be fucked with. Like he was truly the John Wick of goddamn Christianity. It was crazy. So by renaming Byzantium as Constantinople, Constantine sought to establish a distinctly Christian city that would serve as a beacon for the growing faith. This was a radical departure from Rome, which was steeped in paganism and traditions that Constantine saw as increasingly obsolete. He was like, well, you guys, this is fucking old. I want to do this new shit. Because, I mean, really, the Christians haven't been allowed to do anything up to this point. So they're the ones kind of like doing new stuff. The city was designed with Christian motifs, churches were built, and Christian ceremonies became ingrained in its cultural fabric. And then in AD 334 to 335, we have the campaigns against the Goths and Sarmatians. Which is going to cause some issues here. So in AD 335, 334, Constantine embarked on military campaigns against the Goths and Sarmatians, proving that his commitment to Christianity had not dampened his resolve as a military leader. So, and this is kind of important because the Goths and the Sarmatians were tribes from beyond the Roman frontiers, posing threats to the empire's stability. These campaigns were vital for safeguarding Roman territories and asserting the empire's power in regions that had been zones of contention. It also showed a nuanced approach to statecraft. While Constantine was a proponent of Christianity, he didn't hesitate to employ traditional Roman military tactics and strategies, including the use of overwhelming force and strategic alliances. The emperor's actions showed that he was willing to set aside religious convictions when it came to the pragmatic aspects of ruling an empire. In other words, Constantine was a Christian emperor, but he was an emperor first. He knew that like his beliefs and everything can't get in the way of, keeping the empire stable. He knew what was more important, and that was his people, instead of just, this belief that he's been playing around with. And there's certain stuff that he obviously disagreed with. Otherwise, he would have, had a little bit more conviction with certain things. Historical sources such as Eusebius of Caesarea gives accounts that often blend the military and spiritual aspects of Constantine's reign. He describes the emperor as divinely guided, reinforcing the notion that Constantine saw his military victories as signs of divine favor. Much like his victory at Milvian Bridge, this blend of military action and religious beliefs showcases the complexities of Constantine's rule and the multifaceted role he played as both a religious and political leader, because in many ways, like, he was a religious leader. He was the savior for the Christians, essentially. His campaigns were generally successful, cementing Roman authority in the regions and showing the empire's neighbors that despite internal religious changes, Rome remained a formidable military power. They weren't to be fucked with still, despite like all the shit that was going on. Okay. And now in AD 336, we have the baptism and death of Arius. So Arius, the controversial theologian who sparked the Arian controversy, met a sudden and unexplained death. The event captured the public's attention largely due to the rumors that Emperor Constantine himself had orchestrated the death, possibly by poisoning. Because Arius was, he was fucking around shit, and he was stirring up issues that didn't need to be stirred up. He was a divisive figure in early Christianity, advocating for the belief that Jesus Christ was not co-eternal with God the Father. Really pissed off a bunch of people. Stance that directly contradicted the mainstream Christian theology, especially with, Jesus being resurrected and essentially being the one who's guiding everyone now. So, the debate around Arianism had reached a fever pitch that Constantine had previously convened. That Constantine needed to convene the First Council of Nicaea again. Well, he had already convened that council to handle it. It's important to note that sources in the matter, like many other episodes in early Christian history, are fragmented and biased. So while some early Christian writers, such as Athanasius, held that Arius' death was divine punishment for his heresy, others whispered that Constantine, desperate to maintain unity in his empire, had a hand in his sudden demise. Because it was rather sudden. He didn't just wasn't getting sick or anything. It's like, bam, dead, out of nowhere. And so a bunch of people were like, maybe let's not get on Constantine's bad side then, which is fair. I wouldn't either. Okay, now in AD 337, we have Constantine's baptism and death. So the life of Constantine the Great, the emperor who had done so much to shape the Christian church in the Roman Empire, reached its final chapter in AD 337. Constantine was baptized shortly before his death, a move that was both deeply personal and symbolically potent. Intriguingly, he chose Euspices of Nicomedia to perform the baptism, a bishop associated with Arianism initially, the very theological stance that had caused so much controversy and division within the church. The decision to be baptized by an Arian bishop puzzled many contemporaries and has continued to confound historians. Some suggest that Constantine's choice was a political maneuver, an attempt to bridge the widening gap between mainstream Christians and Arians, kind of like get everybody on the same side again. Others argue, which honestly, with Constantine's life, I could totally see him doing that. His whole life is spent more focused on unifying and like helping people instead of like causing these chasms and schisms within society. Like I totally see him. I personally believe that that's what happened. Others argue that Constantine might have personally leaned toward the Arian beliefs, although this is purely speculative. Nothing's written on it. So what is certain is that the emperor was keenly aware of the political and religious implications of his choice. Yeah, he definitely knew what the fuck he was doing. The guy was smart. Constantine's baptism took place shortly before his death on May 22nd, 337. His passing marked the end of an era, not just for the Roman Empire, but for Christianity as a whole. In his time, he had legalized the practice of Christianity, convened the First Council of Nicaea to standardize its doctrines, and it even attempted to build a new Rome focused on Christian principles. The empire he left behind was markedly different from the one he had inherited. Its religious landscape had been transformed, and its capital would soon shift east to Constantinople. The significance of Constantine's baptism by an Arian bishop, especially so near his death, remains a topic of debate. It symbolized the complex interplay between personal faith and political strategy that characterized his reign. Was this final act a personal confession of faith, a last-minute political calculation, or perhaps a blend of both? We will never fully know. Regardless of the motivations behind it, Constantine's death prompted a period of instability, conflict over both his succession and future direction of the Christian church. So, that will bring us to the end of today's historical world. We did it, guys. We made it to the end. That was a long one. A long one, but a good one, I hope. I definitely enjoyed this. Next week, we'll continue on with the third and final part, I guess, of this series, where we'll be going over Empress Irene. But before that, let me go into some of my thoughts and takeaways, because I need to kind of explain myself, I feel like. My whole idea here, and my problems with, things like the Nicaea Council and with a lot of like Christian historians in these accounts is how they essentially attribute there's a ton of bias in it, and Constantine's actions don't seem to reflect the bias that they present in their accounts and writings for a lot of things. So, for Constantine, a lot of this was more to unify the empire after the schism that was created by the Roman emperors and the persecutions that they've caused towards the Christians. And the Christian community growing and growing despite all these persecutions and murdering, essentially. They were finally starting to get a little more weakened. And if Licinius took over, he probably could have finished them off. Or who knows, maybe they would have still persisted and, continued on. Also, I have some issues with some of the doctrine, just of like, again, the whole suffering thing gets to me. I'm like, why? If he loves you, why does he want you to go through? I don't know. Maybe because it's like a tough love sort of deal where God's like, listen, kiddo, you need to get burnt alive. That's the only way you can understand the challenges that I need you to overcome. Is if you get burnt alive. But that the challenges you need to overcome are in heaven. So yeah, you think heaven's gonna be peaceful? No, it's gonna be much worse. You're gonna suffer so much worse up there, actually. Or some, I don't know. See, And that doesn't make sense to me either. Why would death not be respite from all the pain and suffering that life throws at you? That's what I think death is supposed to be. It's just supposed to be peaceful. I'm not going to get into that too deeply. I know some people have issues listening, talking about death and all. So, other than that, the Council of Nicaea, they essentially a lot of the beliefs were dictated over the fact that they needed to make the Roman populace happy with the decisions they were making, and didn't want to adhere to the Jewish Christians who had converted from originally being Jewish, and then they made Jesus white, which is another confusing aspect, even though he was from Jerusalem. There's a lot of issues here, and a lot of it was done just to appease the Roman populace. It wasn't really done out of I guess okay, I should say with the first council, it was also done because of Arianism kind of causing a lot of issues there. And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. That's the way it presents. It's not like Aryan, not like the Aryan race, but Arianism is, again, that belief that Jesus Christ wasn't co-eternal with the Heavenly Father or God the Father. So, yeah, that's another deep issue there, too. Overall, this is where I feel like if you take a look at the whole backdrop, everything, right? The Romans were persecuting the Christians for over 200 years at that point, and they finally started to get some political power with Constantine. And then there was a division in their beliefs because of this, and then Constantine saw that as something that's disruptive to his rule and to his empire, and wanted to squash that like he had done with everything else that was divisive and disruptive to the rule and stability of the Roman Empire. And then they attributed Constantine as this great Christian guy who wasn't even Christian until he was dead or was about dead. So, Constantine was more concerned about, keeping everybody helpful. And he was probably the Christian God's help me out. So let's just keep him around. I like the guy, essentially, because, back then that's what you did. You picked a deity. If that deity helped you out, you kept picking that deity. That was the winning team to be on. So, but he did, man. I don't think it's honestly too much deeper than that. I think that's what he did. He picked the winning team, and that was Constantine's choice. But like I said, on the next episode, we'll go over the Second Council of Nicaea, where we'll begin to see paganism kind of have the last laugh in a way with the church. So that'll be fun, and we'll be going over the life of Empress Irene, and part of the life of Constantine VI. So again, we'll go over the events after Constantine's death as well. It'll be fun. But I don't know. Let me know your guys' thoughts. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it. I love talking to you guys. I didn't get any responses from last week. Oh, please go check out Stereotypical Podcast. We'll be releasing that every Thursday. Just go check it out. It's a fun one. I like doing that with my friends. I hope you guys have fun listening to it. I love the edits that I've been doing to it. I think it's been fun. It's really helped me get my editing a little better and want to be better at it. So I hope this episode is kind of reflective of that too. I really tried to focus on my editing skills here. Other than that, just spread this, man. I want this show to grow. I feel like I've gotten to a point now where things are getting smoother, getting a little better. And I hope you guys feel that way too, where you feel like you can share this with other people and it's not embarrassing for you to share because you enjoy it. At least I hope you're not embarrassed for enjoying this. I hope I'm not just a guilty pleasure, but I'm, something that you look forward to listening to. So, but that's all, guys. Love you all. Go spread the violence. Or something. I don't know. We'll come up with a motto eventually. I'm thinking spreading the violence or begin a war or do something, I guess. You guys are going. Bye.
I hope you had a good time listening to the show. Now go spread the word like I like to spread my cum all over my spouse's milk.
Sorry. So dumb. Sorry, that's all. Bye.